Welcome to Beyond the Pod, presented by SodaStick.com.
Brunette, he moves, Brunette back in, he scores! Minnesota has upset the Colorado Avalanche! Andrew Brunette, the game-winning goal!
Here are your hosts, the second greatest scorer in Gopher hockey history, Pat Micheletti, and the second greatest hockey analyst on this podcast, Brandon Mileski.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pod. Brandon Mileski, along with former Golden Gopher great Pat Micheletti, and Beyond the Pod, as always, brought to you by SodaStick.com. Hello, Patrick. How are you?
Good, Brandon. How are you?
Good. Just chatted with you last night as we did Wild Fan Lane, and I do want to talk Wild here in a little bit, but because you were on vacation, we took a week off of Beyond the Pod. I did not talk to you last week, so I don't think I've talked to you about the Frozen Four since that occurred. The Gophers kind of got handled a little bit by Minnesota State Mankato in the semis. Mankato has a 1-goal lead in the championship game going into the third period, and then the floodgates open for Denver. Your general thoughts on the Frozen Four?
Well, I thought it was a terrific Frozen Four. I thought going into it, I thought any one of the four teams had a chance to win and would have been a great representative as the champion. The Denver-Michigan game was terrific, right? Going to overtime and Denver wins it. And then Minnesota State, it was almost like I was watching it last year's game because it was the same type of game where Minnesota State just shut them down. And it was really, they mirrored each other in my opinion. And Minnesota State deserved to win the game.
What went wrong from a Gopher standpoint in the first game? They got out to the early 1-0 lead and on a opportunistic turnover, beautiful passing play back and forth in the 2-0, but it's kind of really the only scoring chance they were getting. I mean, Mankato was just suffocating them the entire game, especially the more it went along.
Yeah, and I thought the key for Minnesota to win the game is that you have to take Minnesota State. You have to make them feel uncomfortable, get them out of their game, get them out of their element. But if you play right into it, they're going to beat you all the time. And I didn't think Minnesota's defensemen got involved in the play enough. You can't get outmanned. And especially with a team as heavy as Minnesota State is, they check really well. They play position very well. And if there's two Mankato guys to one Minnesota, you're not going to beat them, or 2 against 3 or 3 against 4. And that's what Minnesota was up against last night in the tournament. And I really thought that with how good Minnesota's defense are, I thought they would be a little bit more active. I thought they had to be a little bit more active, and they weren't. And I don't know if that was by design or whatever the situation was, the strategy. So, it was just a well-executed game by Minnesota State.
Well, when you have a team as good as Minnesota State, Pat, because you're talking about, maybe the Gophers defensemen should have jumped up in the play and be aggressive. Mm-hmm. I think that's always a challenging thought for a defenseman when you are playing a team as good as Minnesota State Mankato, that they're hard to get chances against. That A, you probably do have to be aggressive just to be able to add some offense, but B, if you make any mistakes, you're done. So you have to play aggressive while also not making mistakes, and that's a hard mindset for a group of defensemen to have to go through.
It really is. There's no doubt about it. There's risk reward, right? And but if it's not working, and in midstream you have to change your plan to try to do something different. I don't think Minnesota did that. And so it's like, okay, we're going to try it again. Oh, we're going to get stopped again. And that cycle goes on. I mean, there were times where Minnesota would try to get the puck in deep, and it would only get as far as the top of the circle. And then they would transition back. The Mavericks would. So it was really, really tough sledding, and, unfortunate, but listen, it's tough to get there. I thought the 4 best teams in the country were there, and it was a great show put on.
All right, from Mankato's side of this, back to the championship game. how surprised? I know you thought highly of Denver going into the Frozen Four.
Yeah.
You said it on this very podcast that little old Denver, nobody's talking about them,
Right.
and I know you thought highly of them. That being said, after watching the first 2 periods of that game, after seeing the way Mankato had been playing all season long, with how stingy they are defensively, with Dryden McKay, you get the Hobie Baker winner in your net. Were you surprised at that point through 2 periods to see Denver kind of roll in the third?
Yeah, I was, because I didn't, I thought, I really thought that Mankato would even get better in the third, to be quite honest. I thought their goaltender held them in. I mean, really kept them in the game. And through the first 2, they were unable to really get anything going. And then they found it. And, the same thing kind of happened to Minnesota State against Harvard. They played 2 really good periods, and then Harvard started moving. They started cycling. They got them out of their element a little bit, and once Minnesota State is not built to, even though they scored a lot of goals, but they're built on holding leads, getting a lead, and playing that's the system that shuts everybody down. And Denver found a way. Denver's really talented. I mean, even much more talented than I thought they were. And you got to give them credit. They win championships there. They've won 9 NCAA championships. So the history is there with Denver.
All right, we mentioned Dryden McKay, the goaltender. Obviously, news came down on him within the past week about performance-enhancing drugs, and he's suspended for 6 months. And Pat, I am far from a PED expert, so I understand what I'm about to say might sound very uneducated to some and could be extremely wrong. Most times when athletes are busted for performance-enhancing drugs and they come out with some excuse, I typically don't believe the excuse that's coming out of their mouth. I will say in Dryden McKay's case, the statement he had did seem sincere to me. One, it's a position, Pat, where I'm not really sure how much PEDs would help with a goaltender, right? Like,
Yeah.
I guess if you're trying to stay on the ice from an injury, that would make sense. But, goaltender is a position where flexibility is more important than pure strength, right? I mean, most goalies you see are not the biggest guys in the world. They're not big and buff. So from that standpoint, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for a goalie to want to gain muscle. I guess maybe if they're trying to get through an injury, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But his whole story, and obviously with COVID and the pandemic and wanting to make sure that, he wasn't getting COVID-19 before the Olympics in case he could play, like, the whole story kind of made sense. And that the fact that it wasn't on the label. Now, I know ultimately athletes should know what they're putting in their body, but let's face it, it's a college kid, Pat.
Right.
I mean,
right.
When I was 19, 20, 21 years old, I didn't have the mental capacity to be able to figure out what I was putting in my body. So, like, I do kind of feel like his version of the story is sincere.
Well, I believe it even more because if you're guilty, you're not going to go and do get all the testing done that they did to find out what the heck did I take?
Yeah.
And they went to laboratories and, again, like you, I am no expert and I have no idea. But based on what they did to try to find out what it was and how much of it, right there. And listen, we've had him on our show before. Great kid. And so I feel bad for him because I think it amounted to like a grain of salt. And I don't, again, no idea if a grain of salt would make you Superman or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's too bad. It probably cost him getting a contract right now because he would have signed with somebody. And so he'll have to wait now till October when the 6 months is up and get back at it.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, it kind of taints the Hobie Baker and the season he had, even though I'm not really sure it should. But but in some people's eyes, that will kind of taint that. I want to talk about both Mankato and Minnesota moving forward. We'll begin with Minnesota State. Obviously, they had a very senior heavy team. They were an older team. What's kind of the future outlook for the Mavericks? You're losing McKay. You lost Nathan Smith signed
Smith, and
with Arizona.
I know they have some good kids coming in from the BCHL. That's kind of where they recruit. That's kind of where they store guys. They'll need a new goaltender next year, and it'll be interesting to see if they go to the portal for that. Now, there's not many left because a lot of guys have already committed to other schools. But the way that Mike Hastings recruits is that he has guys in the pipeline that are ready to come in and play. So I don't think we'll see a ton of drop off. Now, again, when you lose that many guys, the number that they're losing and their leadership and all of that, they have to rebuild that. But he's built that program up so well that they'll be well prepared to enter next season again, probably number one in that league.
Let's talk about Mike Hastings, the head coach there, Pat, because obviously whenever college coaches, especially at smaller schools, have success, then the rumors start coming out, right?
Yep.
And, Hastings has been there for a long time. He's built that program up. But, let's face it, there could be opportunity for him elsewhere for much more money than he's making down in Mankato. We've had Mike on the show. I love having him on the show, but I'm not going to act like I'm close enough with him to know what his thinking is, whether he just wants to stay in Mankato his whole life or whether he wants to move on. We've heard the same rumors of Scott Sandelin, and he's just stayed in Duluth for all this time. But is it possible that Hastings could move on to bigger and better things?
Well, he's going to be the most sought after coach in college hockey, number one, and deservedly so. Coach a junior national team, Olympic assistant, and now he's going to go to the World Championships with Team USA as an assistant under David Quinn, who is the head coach of that team also. There are two jobs. Well, there's one job that's opened in the Midwest right now, and that's Michigan State, who right now might be the worst program in college hockey. Wow. And they used to be a power.
Yes.
They used to be a power. They used to fill Munn Arena. They've got a ton of tradition. They have a ton of money. So I would venture to guess that there are feelers out for Mike Hastings. Now, whether he would want to entertain that or not, I don't know. I haven't talked to Mike about it, and nor have you. But they're going to call. They're going to call him. Another job, and we're waiting to hear the outcome of this, is Mel Pearson at Michigan. They did not renew his contract this past summer. Wow. And so his contract ends, I believe, at the end of the month. And so they have that timetable to give him a new deal or replace him. If Michigan opens up, they will knock on Mike Hastings' door. There's no question about it. And again, another school that has the resources to upgrade his pay, and it's a blue blood, right? So I knowing these coaches, and I'm not saying they're not loyal, but they're also looking at themselves and they're the big picture here and the opportunity to coach at one of these schools. So I don't know what Mike would do. I know he's real happy at Minnesota State, but regardless, they're going to knock on his door. And now there's a couple schools out east, BU and BC, that have openings. They're the big two out in Hockey East. Will they go after him? I don't know. My guess would be they'll get somebody from out east. So if he were to go anywhere, I would probably think that Michigan and Michigan State you have to be aware of.
All right, let's talk about the your Golden Gophers. They lose out in the Frozen Four to Minnesota State Mankato. Obviously, Ben Myers goes pro. He signs with Colorado. We could talk about that as well because the Wild were in on him and wanted to get him in. You lose to Sammy Walker to graduation. That being said, Pat, it could have been a lot worse, I think, for the Gophers. You have two, maybe your two best players both coming back, and both of them could have gone pro in Brock Faber and Matthew Neese.
I I was shocked that Faber came back. I thought he'd be in the lineup in game 1 for the LA Kings against the Edmonton Oilers. But he just felt that he needed another year to develop and wanted, and he has goals. And some players have goals of wanting to win a national championship. And if they would have won the championship, I think he would have been gone. Opted to come back, and Matthew Nyes could have signed, but I look at Matthew Nyes, and is he ready? Physically, yes.
Yeah, he's
but
a big boy.
When you're going up and just making that next jump, it's difficult. And I think it was the smartest move he could have made, just to give him another year to mature mentally, and get ready for that 82 game grind and the pressures and getting acclimated to the NHL. I think he'll be in a much better position next year to sign than right now. And I look no further than Ben Myers. Ben Myers, you know what? He's ready. He's 23 years old. He's mature. He's developed physically, and I think he's going to end up being a great pro with the Avs. I'm really unfortunate that Minnesota wasn't able to get him, because I think he would have been one of those guys that you and I talked about that could fill a need next year for Minnesota just based on salary. So good for Ben, but it certainly is good for Minnesota to get those two guys back, because they have a recruiting class coming in that is going to be, better than last year's. And Minnesota will be, the prohibitive favorite to win it all again next year.
Pat, for a while in college hockey, it seemed like there were a lot of one and dones, and players were very eager to get to the NHL level. And I'm wondering if that trend is starting to be reversed a little bit here. And I also think maybe part of this is, Pat, it seems like there's a lot of players now that, one, they're open to, staying in college as long as they can, and then basically getting to, free agency for hockey now, right? Where I'm not going to sign with you now. I can sign somewhere. I can sign wherever I want. Or you also have the part of this where a lot of these guys now are able to burn off a year of their contract,
right?
As part of their negotiation. Like, if you want to sign me, you got to burn off a year of my contract. So from a financial standpoint, you're not being hurt staying in college hockey like you once were. So I'm wondering if this is going to be a trend now where kids are staying another year or two in college hockey, whereas maybe in the past, 10 years ago, they'd go straight to the pros the second they could.
Right. And listen, I think we've had this discussion before. When I'm down doing Iowa Wild games, and I'll talk to, some of the college players that have signed and, that I'd known and whatever. And they signed early, and, to a man, they all say, man, wish I would have stayed. I really miss the college atmosphere and the cheering and the band and my teammates and all that stuff, because more often than not, you are going to spend a year in the AHL, and that's fine. And it's a great league, but it's a grind. It's a grind. 82 games. Sometimes you're on a bus. Sometimes you're on a plane. Sometimes you're playing 3 games in a weekend, and your practice schedule and all of that, and living alone, and in a foreign city. It's taxing, and it takes time to get adjusted, and really that's why they're down there, is to get used to being a pro. But getting that extra year, I think guys are finding that it helps in their development, and plus they're having a blast in college, and it's a really fun atmosphere to be in. Look at Ryan Johnson, right? Number 1 draft pick of the Buffalo Sabres. If the Buffalo Sabres don't sign him now, they risk the chance of losing him.
Yes.
I think Ryan wants to come back. I think Buffalo would like to sign him. And if they don't, then he's a free agent, right? And so really, really difficult just from
which I don't like that rule, by the way, Pat.
I hate it.
I don't like that these guys can get to a certain point where like, oh, I'm just gonna be a free agent.
Yeah, because you know what? Ryan Johnson, quite frankly, is not ready for the NHL. And having another year, and putting that pressure on, a team putting that pressure on to sign him, and the team may not want to sign him yet. They may want him to go back for another year. And so I wish they would get rid of it. I don't like it at all, because it puts a team and the player in a difficult position.
All right, Pat. Our listeners should go to sodastick.com and why is that not working? There we go. Go to sodastick.com to get your original Minnesota sports inspired goods. If you haven't seen this stuff yet, you got to check it out. All their apparel screen printed here in Minnesota on super soft, super comfy shirts. You'll love it. We're going to hook you up with 15% off your next order. So use the code KFAN for 15% off. That is sodastick.com, original Minnesota sports inspired goods. Use the code KFAN for 15% off. Pat, let's move on to the Minnesota Wild. It's basically a 100% chance, just shy of 100%,
Yep.
that they will be facing the St. Louis Blues in the first round. The Blues in the Wild right now tied with 103 points at the time of this taping of the podcast. The Wild do have a game in hand, but we talked a lot about it on Wild Fan Line last night, that you have a situation, Pat, where two of the best teams in the Western Conference, because of the way the playoffs are seeded, are going to play each other in the first round.
You look at any matchup in the first round, any year, it's difficult. It's going to be difficult. This one is going to be probably more difficult because you have two of the best teams playing against each other right away. I was going to ask you, and we didn't talk about, do you have a preference whether it's home or road?
Well, sure. I think you'd always prefer home. I don't think it's make or break in the series. I think you're going to have to win games on the road. You look at past stats, and home ice advantage in the Stanley Cup playoffs really is not existent.
Right.
That being said, if you just look at regular season numbers, the Wild are much, much better at home. They seem to play freer and looser in a more entertaining style. And then, it's nice to be able to have second change against a team like St. Louis, because they have depth and they can score everywhere. I don't think it's as important as it would be like if you're facing Colorado, where you want to make sure you've got Brodin out against McKinnon at all times.
Right.
But, do you want your shutdown defenseman when Tarasenko's on the ice? Yes, I would say you would. So I do think there is a slight edge, but ultimately the team that executes is going to be the team that wins.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to. Part of me says, I like the fact that you can go on the road. You don't feel the pressure. Your whole goal is to get one win. Is there more pressure on the home team to get those first two at home before you go on the road? We could debate it all day long. Ultimately, you got to win 4 games. I think it's going to be a hell of a series. I really do, because St. Louis is really, really well coached. They move the puck well. They cycle well. And to me, when Minnesota has their full complement of forwards together, and quite frankly, their D, I do think I really give them, and we talked about it last night, I picked them in 5, even though I have to be honest, I did pick the Blues to get to the Stanley Cup final in September or October.
You
can
go back both sides of it now.
But I think I picked the Blues and the Panthers to get to the final. But that being said, you have to watch the season and see how things go, because I didn't think Minnesota would be the team that they are. I thought they'd be fine. I thought they'd be a playoff team, but I didn't see the year that they had. And you brought it up last night, all the guys with record years. And it just seems to me to be falling into place. And that's why I picked them in 5. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. But it's going to be a great series. I think every series in the first round, we still don't know if Dallas is going to make it, who's going to get that last spot. They have 91 points.
Vancouver had a bad loss, lost an extra point there in overtime last night to Ottawa, in what game they had 2-0 lead. So, it's basically Dallas and Nashville, 80% chance those two are the bottom
Yep.
2 seeds.
Yep.
I think Vegas has like a 20% chance of getting in, but
yeah, it's 91, 87 in points right now, and 5 games left. So
not a lot of time.
Not a lot of time, unless Dallas just, loses out. But we'll see. But hey, and the winner of that gets to play Colorado. So
nice little reward.
Yeah, you make the playoffs, but you got to play Colorado.
You mentioned St. Louis and your belief in them back in September, and I'll give you credit if that was the case at the time, because I thought St. Louis was a bit of a mess going into the season, Pat, where the whole Tarasenko situation, you thought, they might lose him to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. And, he really, whether it's been injuries or just play, hasn't been quite himself. 6 months ago, Pat, he looked like that's a guy who's overpaid. And now he's kind of had a little bit of a rebirth this season. And we've seen in the past when Tarasenko's going, they already have a pretty good depth, not only from a forward position, but they have some defensemen who can chip in offensively as well. And then when you get the star going and you combine that with a Ryan O'Reilly, who's great in the faceoff circle and can bring you some grit and some scoring, they're scoring basically at the same rate the Wild are this year.
Well,
and I didn't see that coming.
They made a deal with the New York Rangers and fleeced them. They fleeced the New York Rangers, getting Pavel Buchnevich, who Tarasenko has another Russian to speak Russian with and buddy with, and they're playing together, and that line has been. Buchnevich has, I think, going into last night, he had 28 goals, and I think they gave up. Well, they gave up a guy who's not even playing, and he escapes me right now the name, but that's regardless. They got a steal from the Rangers, and he's been really, really good for him. You add Ryan O'Reilly, who I just think, at the end of the day, he's just a gamer. He's not a great scorer, but he can score. He wins draws, he kills penalties, he plays on the power play. He's kind of like a little better version, at least from of an Eriksson Ek type, okay, and a little more polished. He's been in the league a little bit longer, and he knows how to win. Really good captain for that team, and kind of drives them without driving them.
Well, I'm glad you brought him up, because I think Ryan O'Reilly, when people look at why the Wild maybe have had a difficult matchup with the Blues over the last couple of seasons, but specifically the last 2 years, I think O'Reilly is a big reason for that, because the Wild historically have not been great in the faceoff circle.
No.
And Ryan O'Reilly is unbelievable in the faceoff circle. And you get in certain circumstances, you get in big situations like power plays and penalty kills where they're winning the draws right out of the gate. Like that just, and then it's so much harder to score in those situations or defend in those situations. And you feel like you're climbing uphill a lot. And a lot of it, sometimes I think faceoffs get vastly overrated by a lot of people.
Yeah.
But in this situation, I do think that's part of the reason that the Wild don't match up with the Blues is they start with possession of the puck a lot.
I'm glad you brought that up as to the difference between important faceoffs and non-important faceoffs. The important faceoffs are the penalty kill and the power play. And if you can get control of the puck, it's going to kill time, or it's going to give you more time. And so they are really good. I think O'Reilly is at 55% or close to 60% on the draws, which is I believe fairly good in the National Hockey League.
Yes.
So those are areas. If we're gonna break down the series, it's gonna come down to winning the important draws. It's going to be the specialty teams, because the St. Louis power play right now is red hot, but they've been red hot as a team too. But that's not, I mean, and you brought it up to me last night, and I said, Minnesota's got to get their power play going, and it hasn't been that as bad as some people might think it's been. That being said, specialty teams are going to be, ultra important come playoff time, and so whoever wins those battles, I think is going to come out on top.
5-on-5, I think these teams are pretty comparable. I think the Blues have a bit of an edge on special teams, as you just mentioned, with the power play and the penalty kill. If the Wild are to win the series against St. Louis, I think it's probably because your goaltending is going to be better than St. Louis's goaltending, depending on what goaltender the Wild go with, or whether they go with both. But I think they can have an edge there. What do you think of the young Billy Husso for St. Louis, and whether he can handle a playoff series?
Yeah, he was kind of an afterthought, brought up last year, and was the backup to Bennington. But Bennington has had they've kind of lost confidence in him. He's played better as of late. I think ultimately, I think Husso is going to be their guy when game one starts. I saw him down in Iowa. He was with their the minor league team, and people were raving about how good he's going to be. And listen, he's done the job for him, and they trust him and they're confident in him. Ultimately, I think if Minnesota, because I am not sold on the Blues D. I really am not. I think we talked about it last night. They've got. You want to talk about some smaller guys. Torrey Krug back there is not your biggest guy. Pretty offensive, pretty good. Parayko, Scandella, those three. I think they're gettable. I really do. And if Minnesota can get going on their forecheck, and when their forecheck is going, it's really, really good. But I think they can pound them enough if they can get in there and sustain some offensive pressure. I think Minnesota will be a load to handle for the Blues.
All right, Pat. Let's finish the show like we always do with some lovely stick taps. Do you have a stick tap for this week?
I had one. Oh boy, I had a really, really good one. How about you go first, and then
I'll go first. I'll give you a chance to think about it. My stick tap goes to a guy that I have a strong affinity for, Pat, and that would be first round draft pick, Iowa Wild center Marco Rossi, who just last night scored a goal. He now holds the Iowa Wild single season record for most points by a rookie in franchise history. Most points by a rookie in franchise history for Marco Rossi, coming off a year in which he had the COVID issues and the heart issues. To be able to put that type of season together, absolutely spectacular for Marco Rossi, and hopefully he's done enough where he can play in the NHL on a full-time basis next year.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with, since I talked about him earlier, I'm gonna go with Mike Hastings and his team for the year that they had of getting to the final game, coming up a little bit short, but what he has done and what that team has done recently, year over year over year, just consistency and building it and getting to a national championship game. Horns up, Minnesota State Mavericks.
Horns up, stick taps. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Brandon. Have a great day.
We'll talk to you next week. He's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been another episode of Beyond the Pod. Thank you so much for listening on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts, and for watching on the KFAN YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week right here on Beyond the Pod. Bye.